Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me out there? You can hear me. Great. We're going to get started. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for the Book Club of California's Southern California program, tonight titled A Country Called California, Photographs 1850s to 1960s. Thank you again for joining us here at Pasadena Heritage's beautiful and historic Blinn House. We love having our programs here. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California. It's my pleasure to be here and kind of MC and host our Southern California programs with you. So for those of you who might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit, member and donor supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition, finely made books, a quarterly newsletter, which is there on your table if you're interested in checking it out, and keepsakes for our members. We also host a year-round series of programs and lectures like the one this evening here in Southern California and also in San Francisco on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a book club member, you should be, or if your membership has lapsed, you should probably renew your membership because we can't do the work that we do without the support of our members. Our membership dues are modest, and our benefits are many. So I encourage you to go to our website at bccbooks.org to find out more about the book club, to join or donate. There are also forms on your table if you want to find out more. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. The title of the program is A Country Called California, Photographs 1850s to 1960s. And our speaker is Stephen White. Stephen White has been a gallery owner, collector, curator, and historian of photography since he opened a gallery in Los Angeles in 1975. He has been collecting photographs related to California's growth and development over the past 25 years and has more than 1,000 images that tell the visual story of California from the 19th century forward. He has published several catalogs to accompany major museum traveling exhibitions he previously curated or co-curated, and he has written extensively on every aspect of photography history and contemporary photography. His book, A Country Called California, Photographs 1850s to 1960s, is a collection of more than 200 stunning photographs in one volume. It traces the development of the Golden State from the 19th century on through its emergence as the fifth largest economy in the world, all as seen through the eyes of photographers whose names are synonymous with fine art photography, including Carleton E. Watkins, Dorothea Lange, Eadward Muybridge, Adam Clark Vroman, Mabel Watson, and Brigman, and many more. A Country Called California is the 2022 bronze winner for photography at the Forward Indies Book of the Year Awards.
Yeah.
That's quite an accomplishment. Yes, round of applause. Now, if you have questions for our speaker, please wait until the end of the presentation. We should have time towards the end of the presentation to have a conversation with y'all, and we'll take your questions at that time. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Stephen White.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Book Club of California, for inviting me to speak to you tonight. It's an honor to do this, and very happy to see all these people who flocked traffic to get here. One thing that Kevin didn't mention in relation to the book is that there was also last year, from February until July, an exhibition based on this book and some additional photographs that were added at the California Museum of Photography in Riverside, where we had almost 200 images on the walls for people to see. It was quite an exciting opening in February, and the exhibition had a different kind of feel. It was actually called California Stories. And I think tonight you'll understand why they call it California Stories. But when we did the book, the idea of it being a country called California was very appealing. Some of you, probably all of you, remember around 2015 there was a movement to break the state up into 9 parts or 3 parts. They all had different ideas. And with 40 million people in our economy, you know, you think about it, we have the same amount of senators as Wyoming. And I think Wyoming would fit into North Hollywood. So it doesn't seem very fair that with so many people, we really have so little representation and input politically. And I think that's sometimes the concept behind breaking it up. But when I began to research and think about what was so unusual about California, I realized that we have such an odd history compared to every other state and actually every other country. I mean, we were initially under Spain and Mexico, and then we became independent. Who else had a gold rush except Australia and maybe Alaska, but which was then, I think, let's see, yeah, they were part of us. So it was a very unusual beginning. It brought people from all over. And I thought it would be fun tonight to start with the gold rush, because I didn't actually have a gold rush photograph in my collection. And I kept looking for one. They're very expensive. And I finally found a slightly damaged one. And I'm going to show it to you now. You can see the left side of it's a little lost. But basically, this is a group of miners in a place called Diamond Flats. And they gathered at this William Pitt's house that he was renting to have their picture taken and probably hang out and have a good time. But what attracted me to this was that there was a letter in it was a format for miners to send letters back to their families. And I'm going to read you what was in the letter, because I think it'll give you a real feeling of what it was all about. And that's what got me excited, this combination, having the photograph and having something from the man who was in that photograph and who was there at the moment. So what he said was, I am now at Diamond Springs. His name was William Pitt. I am now at Diamond Springs to work in the mines, 45 miles from Sacramento. I have been here almost 2 weeks, and I have found some gold. I have made from $2 to $6 a day while I have been here. I have been here, but there has been no water to wash with, and I think we shall have water now, for it rains now. I am sitting here in my log cabin and taking all the comfort in the world. There is one fellow with me, so we take turns at cooking, so you may know that we live first rate. I've got a little gold dust, and I will send you a piece so you can see how it looks and have something to remember me by till I come home. I hope that you won't get tired of waiting for me. If you should, I want you to let me know it, but I hope you won't. Suppose you would like to know what kind of place this is here. I can tell you this is a hard place. There is a great many folks here that would be glad to go home if they could, and they could after a while if they would save their money. But there is a gambling house close by here, and I have been in there and seen men lose the last cent they have, and have seen some win $40 and $50 in a few minutes, and then go off and get drunk and come back and lose it all again. And some will work all day and spend it at night. That is the way with one half of the folks in California. I should never expect to get home at that rate. And then he goes on to explain he would like to fill out the rest of the book and mail it, but he would have to walk 2 miles to the post office and send it. But this letter, which he wrote to what later became his wife 4 years later, back east, is, I think, a perfect example of what makes California, almost from the beginning. I mean, we became a state in 1850. Gold rush started in 48. By the 50s, there were people all over San Francisco. There were ships in the harbor. There was so much going on, and it was already people from everywhere in the state. And that was so unusual. I mean, there were immigrants who came into New York, you know, at that time, and they spread out around the country, but the influx of people from all cultures, East, West, Europe, Asia, all looking for gold, all looking for wealth. And of course, the wealthiest people were the ones who supplied the miners. I mean, they made all the money. So that is kind of the foundation of what I was thinking about. Then I met this young lady here who was, let me just find where I am here. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm blanking now for some reason. Just a minute. Okay. So this is Lola Montez. Lola Montez was famous before she ever came to San Francisco because she had hooked up not only with Franz Liszt, who evidently they made beautiful music together, but afterwards it was King Ludwig of Bavaria. And she came from, I believe it was Portugal or Spain, and she was just what you'd call a firecracker. When she came to San Francisco, she met a guy, got married within a month. That was like her third or fourth husband at that point. And then she did something called the famous spider dance. And people, the miners would be coming in and they knew who Lola Montez was. And the dance, she would be dancing and then she would go, "Eek, a spider!" And pull up her skirts just high enough so all the miners would get very, very excited. So she was known as the spider dance lady. The interesting thing about her is that about a year after she was in San Francisco, she left her husband, she moved up to the gold rush country, up I believe in Grass Valley. She bought a house and she collected all these weird animals as pets. And she lived there for about 2 years, and then she was off again to the East Coast in Europe. She died young, but she was a fascinating kind of character that came to California, that was part of California. Now this man who built the Lick Observatory in San Jose, James Lick, was at one time the wealthiest man in California. He came here, he'd been selling pianos in, I think it was Valparaiso, Chile, if I remember right. And he came here, he started buying real estate during gold rush period, because it was very cheap. Started buying hotels, built up everything, he had great wealth. So he at one point was going to, because he didn't know what to do with all his money, he was getting old, he was going to build statues of himself all around California.
Good idea.
His friend John Muir said, "I don't think that's a really great idea." So we're on Lick, he said, "Oh, all right, well, what should I do?" He said, "Well, why don't you make a nice big observatory in San Jose?" "Oh, okay." So he built this observatory, and he got so attached to it that he decided he wanted to be buried in it. So that is his tomb at the bottom of the telescope at the Lick Observatory. And I mean, this is California. I find this photograph very interesting, and I'm going to get my little pointer here and point. This man is William Shue, who was actually a gold rush photographer. He was up, there are daguerreotypes that William Shue made during the gold rush. But like many of the photographers, as daguerreotypes and the gold rush petered out, they opened up studios in different places. Well, he's surrounded, as you see, by all these Asians that we are assuming are Chinese. And Shu was very liberal. He came from Boston. He was involved in liberal causes in Boston. And my interpretation, because there's no explanation why he's surrounded by all these people, is that there was something called the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1883, signed by President Chester Arthur, brought out primarily because of wanting to restrict immigration in California, where Chinese businesses were complaining about them. There were all kinds of issues around the Chinese. So I think he is saying, we don't all feel that way. We don't all feel that they should be excluded. And I think it's just a really wonderfully strong statement. And again, another side of California that you don't ordinarily see. And this is, by the way, one of the things that's got me so hooked on photography, is because photographs can have deep explanations. I'll give you a couple of others as we go, or they can have no explanation, and then it's up to you to interpret what you see from the image. And they have both an aesthetic element, or they have no aesthetic element, and they have information that's there if you can discern what that information is. This is by a man named George Fisk. I'm sure most of you know Ansel Adams or Carleton Watkins, but Fisk worked in Yosemite for something like 30 or 40 years, up until about 1915 when he committed suicide, sadly. This is one of his winter scenes. He did a lot of photographs of the nature of Yosemite and lived in a cabin up there. I think, as a matter of fact, this is in the Bernard Hotel. This is in Yosemite, and you could rent this room and get your own redwood tree thrown in at no extra charge. And this looks like these are actually Fisk photographs. So this may have been his studio it's called the Big Tree Room at Bernard's Hotel in Yosemite. And this may well be his studio, very unusual. This is one of my absolute favorite photographs. It's unidentified, there's no name attached. We don't know what film they're filming, but the way they're reacting to this train, that I don't think they expected to be quite as close as it was going, quite as fast as it was going. I think it's phenomenal. And it's about 1920, so it's during the silent period. And these people are, if they don't get totally blown away, capturing something that probably was faster than their cameras. Front page was a part of an exhibition in San Diego. In 1935, in the middle of the Depression, San Diego had a big expo at Balboa Park. And it was very successful. People came from all over, like the World's Fair, and it was really popular. So they realized they were making money, so they said, oh, let's do another one in 1936. So in 36, they did another one, and some of the people at some of the various parts of it left, and other new ones came in. This is one that came in new, and this was called Front Page because it was showing photographs of front page events between 1910 and 1935. So for instance, it had a whole panel of photographs of the Lindbergh kidnapping. It had a whole panel of the destruction of the LA Times when it was bombed in, I believe, 1909 or 10. It had a whole panel of photographs of the Griffith Park fire that killed 22 people, which most people didn't even know it happened. And in order to attract people to go in and see these panels, they put these, here, that's where I can point. You can see That's the famous photograph of Ruth Snyder being executed. And they blew these up. There's one of Al Capone in here. There are different ones. You'll see one other one that I have among the slides. But they did that to, like, you know, it was on the runway and just to attract people, get them interested, and here are people buying it to come in. So that was probably one of the earliest uses of photojournalism. I mean, in the sense that this was an exhibition that you could go in and see these amazing events that had taken place for the last 25 years. Now this is one of them. This was a lynching in San Jose, and it was two men who kidnapped the son of a very wealthy man, that was his name, and they actually paid a ransom, but they killed him anyhow, and dropped him off the San Mateo Bridge into the water. So they were captured, they were put in the San Jose jail, and a mob went after them. They broke into the jail, they took them out, and they hung them. And the governor of California at that time said, if any of these vigilantes are caught, I'm gonna pardon them. But then he died of a heart attack.
The governor?
Yeah, that'll teach him. Anyway, so these were the photographs. They were very sensational. The whole concept of that thing was Hearst journalism, sensationalism. Now this is one where I'm going to have to read you a bit from it because this looks like such a unexciting image, and it is. It's people attending a memorial, and a memorial for a man named Isidore Berkowitz. And Isidore Berkowitz was basically worked as a handyman for the labor unions in the Jewish labor union in Los Angeles, East LA, around Boyle Heights. And they had a clubhouse, and he worked in there, and he worked a couple of other places. In the summer, they had a camp for the kids of the Jewish, mostly communist workers or communist people who were either part of the party or at least involved, interested in it. And they had like 20 kids and 4 counselors who were college kids, college girls for the most part, and Berkowitz and a cook. And one day, and the girl who was the lead counselor, who was in charge of the camp basically, was 19 years old. Instead of putting up the American flag outside, had a little red flag she put up. And that red flag violated something called the Red Flag Act, which was produced in something like 28 states around the country in 1919, after the Bolsheviks took over in Russia. They banned the red flag in all these states, including California. So one day, the district attorney from San Bernardino and the American Legion, about 8 cars of them, showed up at this camp and arrested everyone. They arrested the 4 girls, they arrested the cook, they arrested the cook's mother, who was visiting her that day, and they arrested Isidore Berkowitz. They took them all in for a trial. At the trial, they were represented by the ACLU, which had formed about 8 years earlier. This is 1929. So the ACLU represented them. They were found guilty, and the ACLU then appealed the case. Between the time that the case was, that they were found guilty and sentenced, and it was appealed, Berkowitz killed himself. He committed suicide, hung himself in, I think, that lodge. And this was a memorial for him. What's interesting is that they were sentenced, at that time, San Quentin was co-ed, up until 1933. So they were sentenced to San Quentin. well, the cook's mother was acquitted, but the cook and I think the cook probably didn't get any sentence because she wasn't directly involved. But the girls who were counselors got 5 years in San Quentin each, and the head girl got 10 years.
Wow.
And they were then, went on appeal, they lost the appeal, went to the Supreme Court in 1931. Brandeis was on the court, I think it was Charles Evan Hughes was the Chief Justice. By a 7-2 vote, they said the Red Flag Act was illegal, it violated First Amendment rights, and they threw the whole case out. And so they never went to prison, but it was an amazing case. And I mean, when I saw that, and I got it, the person I bought it from sent me this appeal. It's like a 6-page appeal from the ACLU to get money to help defend these people, and it explained the entire case. Very fascinating. And another side of our history, of course. This I'm not going to talk much about, but this is part of the water that was actually ended up supplying San Francisco from the Sierras. It was just, there are several photographs I have of that. This photograph of the redwoods is really here basically from an aesthetic point of view. I mean, the way the light comes in on the trees, it was by a man named Erickson who worked up in the redwood country and did a book of redwood photographs. Now here's Mr. Vroman, and I'm going to point out where he is. He's right there. So that's Adam Clark Vroman in 1908 in his bookstore. And it's amazing when you think, I mean, I gave one of these talks at Vroman's right after the book came out. And it's amazing to think that I was there in his shop giving this talk, and there he was in 1908 being photographed in his shop. I bought a whole album at Sotheby's to get that photograph because I just thought it was fantastic. And as you can see, they had a lot of books in 1908.
Right.
All right, now, this young lady's name is Kitty Tetch, and she was a waitress at the hotel in Yosemite. And Kitty used to go out with her friend, the two of them, go out there and dance on Inspiration Point, and they had postcards made up, and they signed the postcards for people who came to dinner at their hotel. And the Angel City Press and I, when we were deciding what to put on the cover, we just couldn't resist this. It's just so indicative of the kind of free spirit of California and the openness and the excitement and the visual beauty. I mean, it just combines so many elements. So we're very, very excited about that. And I think it makes a great cover, by the way. And by the way, that is Elliot in the back, for those of you who didn't meet him, who's representing Angel City Press tonight and has books available if anybody would like them afterwards. Where you can see all these photographs all over again. Now this is part of the spruce goose. You may notice the wings are missing. If they weren't missing, half of LA would have disappeared. But they moved this from where they built it in Culver City to Long Beach, and they had to obviously take the wings off. I was very lucky. I bought a collection of Howard Hughes photographs, 250 of them, and there are 90 photographs of this whole transport from the time it left to the time it arrived. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the great flight of the spruce goose, it flew into Long Beach Harbor, and it lasted about, I think it was 12 seconds or 20 seconds, something like that. Hit the water. And that was it. It's now in McMinnville, Oregon, for anyone who's inclined to go see it in person. I actually did, which was really fun. But this is what LA does not look like now. Just nothing but fields. But this was in, I think, 1946 that this was transported.
Wow.
This is Tule Lake. And those of you familiar with the Japanese internments, Tule Lake represented the place where all the bad Japanese Americans went. Those are Japanese Americans who would not sign a loyalty oath, who would not agree to fight in the military, even though their parents and kids were all interred in a prison. And they were sent to Tule Lake. And it was a very desolate place up near the Oregon border. And here you can get a sense of how the camp played out and how desolate and cold it was. And it was one of the real black marks on California in our history. But of course, we didn't do it. Franklin Roosevelt signed it and did the decree. And actually, it was only mostly people on the West Coast. If you were a Japanese American, you lived in Chicago, you could just live your life. But people lost their homes, they lost their farms. It really destroyed a whole subculture. And something that a lot of people don't realize is there was a great group of Japanese American photographers who worked primarily in Los Angeles, but there's another group in Seattle, another in San Francisco. And they were some of the most foresighted modernist photographers. And a friend of mine, Dennis Reed, has done several books on them and exhibitions. And the work is really amazing. And now the big museums like the Getty, the Met, they're all buying these photographs because they're realizing the importance of this subgroup's contribution to photography, which is wonderful. This is Evelyn Nesbit. My wife said, now don't talk too much about Evelyn Nesbit. But I'm going to talk a bit about Evelyn Nesbit because this is her as a teenager. And she was from Pennsylvania. She came to New York with her mother initially. And as a teenager, she got involved with a group of men, primarily James Breeze and Stanford White, who were, shall we say, on the lascivious side. And she became the girl in the red velvet swing who was swinging without anything on. And she had quite an affair with Stanford White. Later, she wanted to become an actress and a dancer, and she got involved in a Broadway production, I think it was Ziegfeld, if I remember correctly. And a man named Harry Thaw, who was a very wealthy man from a very wealthy family and was also nuts, fell madly in love with her. He managed to get her and her mother to go to Europe with him and pestered her until she finally agreed to marry him. So they got married, they came back to New York. One night, they were at dinner at Madison Square Garden, which had been built and designed by Stanford White. And they saw Stanford White at another table, and Thaw he knew the whole story, and he was boiling. Then they went upstairs to they had entertainment afterwards. And so they were up there, Thaw saw him, Stanford White again, walked over to him, pulled out a pistol and shot him, killed him. So then there was a big trial. It was enormous, as you can imagine, from a publicity point of view. He ended up in the nut house where he belonged, and she ended up divorcing him. She had one son, Russell. She married a vaudevillian, and they went on a vaudeville tour, tried to commit suicide a couple of times. Years passed. Russell and his family moved to Los Angeles. So, with 4 kids, which were her 4 grandchildren, Evelyn moved to LA. So now here's Evelyn. Now she's living in Venice in the kind of artist commune. She's a very interesting sculptor, and she's babysitting the kids. Well, my friend Dennis Reed and I were both very intrigued by this whole Nesbit, who actually got hold of one of the grandchildren who's a lawyer in the Valley, invited him to lunch. And he told us that when they were growing up, they had no idea who their grandmother was. The parents were so ashamed of her that they never told these kids that she was as famous as Marilyn Monroe was in our time. And they just thought she was grandma. She made cookies, you know, she made salad. And then she died. And then they read, that by then they were like 18, 19, 20 years old, and they could read the obituaries, and they were just totally blown away by this whole thing. And no idea. So I think that's just another fascinating California story. This may look like Tom Joad, because it's supposed to look like Tom Joad. This is not an actor, but this is somebody that Horst Bristol photographed after he saw the movie, The Grapes of Wrath. Bristol was the man who got Steinbeck to go with him out to see the whole migrant movement in the early 30s, and Steinbeck and he went to camps, they hung out, and Steinbeck said, you know, I don't think I want, they were gonna do a story for Life magazine. He said, I don't think I want to do this. I think I have another idea. When he did, it was called a book, you know, called The Grapes of Wrath. And Bristol got kind of left out in the dark, even though they did use his photographs to create the characters, because Bristol had photographed all these people with the idea of doing the story. So they looked at his photographs, and I think it was John Ford who made the movie. Then took Henry Fonda and various other actors who looked, he felt, fit what Bristol had done. So Bristol then went out and published a portfolio called The Grapes of Wrath. And this is one of the photographs from it, and it's supposed to be Tom Joad. All right, we've seen that one. This is one of my more interesting discoveries. This is Callie, the photographer. Her name was Callie Archibald. Callie Archibald came out from the East Coast in the early 60s and started hanging out in Malibu, running around with some movie stars, very good looking and a little eccentric. And she came from some money. She was married, she had 2 kids she left behind. She then moved to Palm Springs. She bought the house that Bobby Darin and Sandra Dee owned in Palm Springs. And she started doing photography. And this, of course, was right in the middle of the hippie period. And she was going to do photography her own way. She never studied it, really. And she would develop these photographs in her swimming pool. She'd apply the colors in there, come out probably looking like a rainbow herself. But this is one of her portraits. And the interesting thing about Callie, and I'll show you, the next picture is her self-portrait. And you see her in the eye, in her own eye. Really amazing self-portrait. But Callie's work was totally unknown. 2017, I went to a photographic show in Glendale, and someone had 55 of her photographs. Some were hand-colored, some were double printings from San Francisco, mainly architectural. And the colored ones were double printing sometimes. And they were really bizarre, interesting. So I bought the whole group because they weren't very expensive. All right, fast forward 2022, a gallery named Stanley Weiss in New York did a Callie show. Nobody had ever heard of her before that. At the same time, a press published 4 volumes of her work, including her photographs of flying saucers, which she was convinced she saw through her setup in her house. She was then living in the Palisades, which was quite old. And she had these cameras that were basically around the grounds of her house. And she would see strange things, and she was convinced those were flying saucers, and she'd photograph them. So one of the books is on her flying saucers, and one of the books is on her early portraits from the 60s, which is what I mainly have. But that was just a big surprise, because I had no idea when I bought them that she would become, I mean, she was written up in the New York Times, the New Yorker, Wall Street Journal, everywhere, because the show was there and the books came out. And she was, in a sense, the quintessential 60s photographer in California. Unknown, off the wall, and a little nutty, but very interesting in what she was doing. And so with that, I'm going to bring the talk to an end. So, thank you very much. And Kevin says we take questions if anyone has any.
That's right. You want to do the Q&A yourself? You can do it.
You can do it.
Well, we can
You
share.
can answer.
I'll come
You
over
can
and share.
answer.
I got the book, so we can all see what the book looks like. You're going to sign copies too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
great. So let's take some questions from the audience. Does anybody have any questions? Silence. There must be questions. I have a question. I always have questions. It's from the collector's side of the questions.
All right.
So how do you keep your collection? You have thousands, over 1,000 photographs. How are they stored? How are they cataloged? How can you access the photographs and the stories behind all of these images?
Well, the stories are mostly research. They're in flat files, most of them, because they're matted. The ones that are unmatted are in boxes. And they're stored in my office, which is where my whole collection is stored.
So is it cataloged? Do you have a
Well,
list
the
or
ones that
something?
were, like these are cataloged, that part of it, and the part that was the show were cataloged. I don't have all of the California collection cataloged. I have a lot of collections, and some of them are well cataloged and others aren't.
Okay.
So this is about half cataloged, shall we say. Claudia?
The Gold Rush photograph, is that an ambrotype?
Yeah, it's an ambrotype.
And how was the letter connected with it? Was it tucked in behind in the case, or how?
No, the two were part of a whole large group of things that were sold, including the gold that he sent back,
Really?
and his vest, his coat. I mean, it was a whole archive, which unfortunately I never knew about. And then whoever had bought it was reselling these two together. But in the initial description, which somebody got for me, both those were talked about together, the ambrotype and the letter. So that was one element of a larger collection.
And where was home for this particular miner? Did you?
Somewhere in the Midwest, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was
And,
really
but he did
interesting.
marry his girl.
Yep.
You told us stories about some of the photographs. When you bought the photographs, did you know about the history of the photographs, or did you find it out later?
Well, in some instances, like the ones about Isidore, the fellow who sent me the photograph that I bought, which I bought online, also sent me the ACLU request for funds that told the whole story. I never would have known it otherwise. Then I did the additional research to see what had happened and found out that that Supreme Court had knocked off that. So I love doing research, and now they have this thing that's really incredible by Google, where you can take a picture of any photograph and search it, and we have discovered, I have maybe 4 or 5 photographs in my collection that I didn't know what they were. I bought them because basically I'll buy a photograph because I like it. I mean, I don't really, if it aesthetically is pleasing or if it's interesting visually, I don't really care. I mean, I like to know as much as I can, but sometimes you can't. So this was a great big photograph, so like 16 by 20 inches, of a group of people, maybe 500 people in front of what looked like either a hotel or a school in some unidentified town in the 1860s. I'd had it for years, never had a clue as to where it was or why they were celebrating something. I know they were celebrating. So we went on, this friend of mine knows how to do that very well. He took a picture, we went in, we found it. It turned out they were celebrating the end of the Civil War.
Wow.
Oh, my goodness.
So that was so exciting because suddenly I had a place and I had a purpose. And it just gives it, and it gives you an idea of the problem with visual history is that there isn't always an explanation. Like, I would love to know if that's the real story of that shoe photograph with all the Chinese people around him. You know, was it for that reason or was it for some other reason entirely? It's really, you know, there's no way to know. And the only way is that if you, I'll tell you actually another interesting story like that I got recently, because I look around on the internet and if I find something. So this was a group of daguerreotypes and ambrotypes that were being sold on one of the websites. And among them was a photograph of these two old ladies, the Teller twins. The Teller twins looked like they were in their 80s at that point. And it said they were relatives of these other people that were individual daguerreotypes. And because there was a group, they were fairly expensive compared to what most of the things on that website, which are like $25 or $50. This was like $800 for the whole thing. But I was so fascinated by this photograph because it said there is a family rumor that these women met George Washington. I said, oh boy, you know, that would be something. Because in collecting, particularly in daguerreotypes and such, there's a real desire to find photographs where people were either Revolutionary War period or involved in some way, you know, but the idea of somebody who actually met George Washington. So I, you know, okay. So I brought it, I started doing research. Well, Teller, it turned out the Teller family had been there since the 1600s in a place called Dobbsbury, New York. And there was a Teller Point. It also turned out that that was the point where Major Andre met with Benedict Arnold to take West Point and was found out and caught and eventually hung. And that was right at Teller Point, right there. So I got really hooked on this history. Next thing I knew, I found a book by a man named Lessing called The Hudson from the Wilderness to the Sea. It was published in 1866, I believe. In that, there is an interview he did with one of the Teller twins, who was then 90 years old and still cogent. The other one wasn't so cogent. And she gave him the story of how they met George Washington.
Oh, wow. Oh my God, it wasn't just a line.
I couldn't believe it
Amazing.
when I found this. It turned out that they were about 8 or 9 years old, and their father had been in part of the Revolutionary Army because there was a lot of fighting up around that area at that time, above West Point and in that part of New York. And Washington's troops were stationed there for a year or two. So one night, evidently, Washington knew who this guy was, or someone in Washington's troop knew who they were. And he stopped at the house and he was hungry. And he asked if he could get something to eat. So the girls were standing there, they're about 8 years old, looking at George Washington walking in. And he patted them on the head and he said, "You two look alike as two eggs. May you have a long life." And so she relayed this story in this 1866 book to this guy Weston, and I have that daguerreotype.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, can't ask for anything more than that.
I have another question.
Go ahead, go ahead.
What about your archive? Where is it going?
Well, if you can find a place, please let me know. It's not easy. It's very, very hard finding, because Well, my archive, I mean, I have collections, I have a whole history of war collection photographically. I have aviation and space, I have astronomy, I have science, I have industry. These are all different collections. Find a place, you know a place, good, we'll talk after.
They might go to different places, right?
I wouldn't mind, no. I mean, it'd be great if they could stay together.
Together,
but,
yeah.
You know, at least if the collections stay together, that's the main thing.
Any other questions before, over here?
What was your most surprising find?
Most surprising?
Yeah, or
Probably this last one. I mean,
Tell us.
because, you know, when you hear these family rumors about things, well, everyone's, you know, grandparents met George Washington. But to actually be able to have it in writing and from the words of the person who did it,
It's amazing.
that was to me the most amazing kind of experience that I've had. But I've had a lot of really fun, interesting detective pieces, you know, that have turned out to be surprising and interesting. And even things like finding this Callie, you know, and I just had it put away with tons of other things that I didn't particularly look at, and suddenly she becomes a very important photographer. So that kind of transition is fascinating. You know, it's just luck, but you know, luck's good.
So the book is out there winning awards. Everybody's loving it. Hopefully people will pick it up tonight. What's next? What are you doing next?
Well, that's a good question. One, other than what Claudia's talking about, trying to move some of those collections into the right place. But one idea I have is there are a lot of these California photographers that I have in depth, like, you know, collections of like Callie, that really aren't known. And I'd like to do a book of them, if I can find a place. And, you know, maybe I haven't talked to Angel City yet, but I have 10 photographers who historically are all related to California in some way, that I think would make a really interesting book. But we'll see, you know.
So look out for that. That's coming soon to a bookstore near you.
Or maybe from the Book Club of
Or
California,
maybe
who knows?
we can talk about that too. Well, everyone give her a big round of applause for her speaker, Susan White. And thank you, round of applause for yourself. Thank you for attending this Book Club of California program. The next program that the book club is holding is Monday, September 18th at 6 o'clock. That's an in-person and virtual program in San Francisco. So if you are not in San Francisco, you can zoom in for that presentation. It is titled From Books to Bytes, Building the Next Generation of the Bancroft Library Collections. And the speaker is Kate Donovan. She is the director of the Bancroft Library and the Associate University Librarian for Special Collections at UC Berkeley. So that program is actually going to be co-hosted and presented by the Northern California chapter of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America. So it's a must-see, right? Don't miss that program. You can register for that program or any book club program online at bccbooks.org/programs or in any of the emails that you might be getting from the Book Club of California if you are on our email list. If you're not, you can see me and I can get you on our email list. So thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great evening. There's some food left there if you'd like to have a snack before you leave. Please make yourself at home. Thanks everyone.
Pleasure.